When we look at work in job satisfaction and the when you look at the literature on job satisfaction and workplace stress, there's really two factors that are most significant in workplace stress, and that's alienation, which is when there's a disconnect between a person's effort and how satisfying the job is. And often, if the job requirements are disconnected from a person's personal goals or a sense of satisfaction on the job, then that can lead to a sense of alienation. The other is workplace burnout, which occurs when there's a decline in any intrinsic benefits of doing the job. But also burnout results from double binds when there's arbitrary management practices that create an aversion to the workplace. So you can think of it in Pavlovian terms. When the workplace becomes paired with just a sense of aversive emotion, and then that can result in kind of a sense of burnout, that the person doesn't want to, they lose their motivation to go to work. Interestingly enough, this is where we can apply intrinsic and extrinsic motivations and how that feeds into or relates to job satisfaction. And so a sense of achievement is actually an intrinsic motivator. And so intrinsic motivators are things like social relationships in the job, that kind of sense of community and being around other employees, like-mindedness, a job that's fun, humor on the job, the environment itself, and and achievement of goals are all intrinsic motivators. Extrinsic motivators on the job are the paycheck, rewards, status objects like rank, some things like that. But they're not mutually exclusive. For example, intrinsic motivation for a job can be impaired by the stress of not being paid enough, or the injustice, a sense of injustice for not being paid enough. Lately, we've seen large gaps between people at the top of the pay hierarchy and people in the mainstream workforce, which can leave employees feeling disconnected and alienated because they feel as though they're not adequately compensated. So in that case, the pay can represent an intrinsic value, or being intrinsically valued on the job. This is true with high-paid athletes that look at, paychecks, pay contracts that are way in excess of anything that would have an effect on their lifestyle, but it represents something to them when they compare themselves to other players, and so they can have a sense of being underpaid. Ironically, someone that's making millions of dollars on in a sports contract or something like that can wind up feeling that they're not appreciated because other people in like positions are being paid significantly more. So that's why extrinsic motivations and intrinsic motivations, as far as the workplace goes, are not necessarily mutually exclusive. You have to have adequate compensation for the job to be intrinsically reinforcing. Gender's been a big issue in the employment environment. Gender discrimination's been a significant problem, and still is to some degree in the work environment. So there are rules in the EEOC compliance training that people receive in the workplace now. That is training that's designed to prevent EEOC complaints or lawsuits based on gender discrimination. The gender discrimination is whenever someone is denied promotion or access to a job or pay commensurate with other people with their level of position or education or skills based on gender. So it also involves being placed in situations where there are quid pro quo relationships required for somebody to advance, like having to offer sexual favors or affection to move up or gain a promotion. That's a form of gender discrimination. We can also see generally, if we look at the breakdown, the stratification of wealth in the United States, a concept of the sociologists called the feminization of poverty. And what this is this is when you compare people with the same amount of education or skill. What you find is that at the bottom of the stratification, the social strata, you see an increasing number of women as you go down in the pay stratification. So, for example, non-skilled labor that is dominated by females tends to pay significantly less than non-skilled labor that's dominated by males. So, male laborers make significantly more than female laborers. So, you can look at minimum wage employees at the very bottom are overwhelmingly female. And so that's what's referred to as the feminization of poverty. So as you go up the skilled labor force, you find that even in some fields where it's the same amount of education, but one field's dominated by males and another field's dominated by females, females make significantly less. Now, in the same job with the same education, the same taskings, the same title, you're less likely to see differentiation of males and females because there are legal consequences for that. Now, sexual harassment doesn't have to be overt. It can be pretty subtle. In fact, the most significant and high-risk forms of any kind of harassment, like gender discrimination, sexual harassment, gender discrimination, are the subtle kinds. The overt ones are much easier to deal with, but the real subtle ones are not so easy to prove and to deal with. But any unwanted comments that refer to someone's gender are considered forms of sexual harassment. Also, people that form dual relationships, like supervisors or people in power roles that wind up in romantic or sexual relationships with their subordinates, or setting themselves up for a dual role with that person, and that can lead to sexual harassment cases or gender discrimination cases as well. The same thing can happen with regard to age, only age discrimination is very subtle. It's much easier to get away with and a lot harder to prove. Overt age discrimination is is subject to an EEOC complaint. So you asking someone their age or refusing to hire them based on their age, and this is more likely when companies are concerned about health insurance premiums, then they may in subtle ways try to avoid hiring someone that's more advanced in age. There are certain legal situations where someone can set an age limit, like admissions into the military, police officers, or firefighters. There are situations like that where you can set a maximum age limit. And in those cases, you can actually ask their age before you decide to hire them or not. There are also covert age discrimination policies that companies that companies can put in place that are actually pretty common and very difficult to prove. And one of these is to actually have eliminate certain positions that are higher in pay, and because they tend to have older employees and they've worked their way up to a certain level in mid-management or a little bit above the mid-management level, and then they can actually eliminate that position and do kind of a reduction in force, and you wind up reducing a substantial number of people that are older, and that can have a positive impact on lowering insurance premiums. And so, now sometimes these actually can be proven in certain situations as age discrimination. But there's a kind of a paradox that goes on in companies sometimes where as you work your way up and you gain time on the job, your job security goes down. And so when you begin to make more money and you get up into more positions of authority, then those positions are become the most fragile as far as a person's job security. So that's kind of a covert, subtle form of age discrimination that we see pretty often in large corporations.